Hello, 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 hello. Can I be heard out there? I haven't been able to do a sound test properly on this side because my computer decided to completely crash earlier after I had one of my fuses trip and the entire house went dead. So I'm hopeful I can be heard and I'm hopeful all is good. You may notice my mic up here is a little bit wobbly because everything was a little bit rejigged in my system when I came back to it going, oh no, I hope my computer hasn't died. Rather annoyingly, I was halfway through writing something at the time, and when I went back in, the thing I was writing was only half brought back to me. I was deeply upset. So hopefully I can be heard. According to Amadeus Carcosa, I can be heard. That's great. That being the case, let me start with a quick. My name's Andy Law. I am here to do an Ask Me Anything and Ask Andy Anything if you prefer the AAAs, or another Ask Andy Anything if you prefer the AAAs, whatever it might be. And I am a games designer, cartographer, and just general dude who plays games all the time. I have written and mapped and done stuff for tons of things. And I'm here to answer anything that you might throw in my particular direction. If you want to do so, drop into the comments your question on whatever it might be, and make sure you add a quick @LAWhammer at the beginning of it, or I won't recognize it as a question as I'm coming in. Further, if any super chats come in, that is questions that people have paid actual legitimate money for, whether that is on YouTube or whether people are cheering over on Twitch, then they will always come first, because if you're willing to support the channel and us building ourselves an entire new building on the outside to do streaming for LAWhammer, we will always answer your questions first. So, before I begin today, I would just like to say that last night's episode of LAWhammer, for those of you who caught it, it was it kind of went places. For those of you who saw it, you'll know it pretty much had a mix of everything. A cunning PC plan that came somewhat left of field and was, I'm not going to say whether it was effective or not. I'm just going to say that shit went down. It was one hell of an episode. Tons occurred. And by the end of it, I was just left going, wow. The impact of this. Pardon me, I'm going blurry. Let me see if I can fix that. I can't. Let me try again. Oh, I'm back. Yay, my beautiful aging visage can be seen again. So I do recommend, for those of you who are on the road to catching up, catch up so you can catch this episode. It's number 89, called The Citadel. You'll recognize the art for the episode, because it's got the Citadel miniatures, the old Citadel miniature logo as part of building that. It was based on something that Graham and I discussed. That's Graham Davis, who was one of the original writers for the Anything Within campaign and was employed to come back to work on the 4th edition version of it. He and I had big, long discussions for different ways that it could be used, and I have used it in sort of the way that he and I originally discussed, but in a very different version of it, particularly because our version also ties through to various things that happen in the 6th edition, 7th edition, and 8th edition of Warhammer Fantasy Battle. So, long story short, it was a fun episode, and I'm still coming to terms with all the ramifications of it. That, however, is by the by. That was yesterday. Today, we are here to Ask Me Anything, and some questions already coming in, so I'm going to dive into them. And just a quick afternoon, Andy. I hope all is well. All is pretty good on my side. I was in hospital, rather disturbingly yesterday. Well, I suppose the day before, because it was the night before, because I had an unexpected deep reaction to something. I burst out in hives all over the place. I could barely breathe, and it was not an enjoyable time. I went to hospital. They pumped me full of drugs, and I appear to be fine on the other side. I'm just absolutely knackered. No idea how that happened. Something that occurred to my daughters when she was young, but had never occurred to me that I'm aware of throughout my life, and has suddenly become something that happens with me. Go figure. Bummer. So I'm actually pretty well. I'm doubly well because I'm not in hospital, so who's not to like about that one? Hey, Biofoot, what do you think will be the next big superconductor? No idea, not my field. And I have been reading into this, not because of your question, just because I read up on science not very closely. It's not like I subscribe to New Scientist or read particular blogs, but I often have YouTube videos on in the background, and I am happy to admit that this is an area where I don't have the knowledge, BioFood. But thank you very much for that one. This is a fun question from Gers, which I'm going to highlight because it's a fun one before we start moving on to the super chats. How are the Sky Titans pre-old ones when they are tetrapods, but giants and co are hexapods? There are a host of pre-old one species that are tetrapods, not hexapods, as in they've got 4 limbs rather than 6 limbs, including, for example, the Thamir and humanity, which is marked in more than one place, in more than one source, as having existed before the arrival of the old ones, and then the old ones uplifted them and changed them into something else. And most of the species that the old ones uplift are already indigenous. It's only the lizardmen that they bring in, and even much of the lizardmen species as a whole are also uplifted. So tetrapods are over the place, as are hexapods. So the answer to this one is very possibly dragons are the exception, although dragons and dragon ogres et al. Are the exception, not necessarily the Sky Titans et al. I'm just going to admit it right now. I never pronounce your name right because I don't know. Say yes. Say yes. I'm going to say it's say yes today because that's a little bit like I'm saying yes. So say yes, 00. Hi, Andy. Hi. First of all, do mortals poop souls? And what about the symbiotic relations between creatures, like making a bug eat your fruit so that they will leave seeds and such? What happens to souls then? So for those of you who don't know, this is a direct reference to our episode last night, which had a cold opening. Now, for those of you who don't know what a cold opening is, it's loosely speaking, and it's one way of describing it, it is an opening scene that is separate to the main narrative threads of the episode as a whole. And the core opening included somewhat of a speech from, let's just say, a figure concerning the true nature of the soul and what one individual within the Warhammer world had come to believe all of the mortal realms was. And judging by that answer, this one here first, do mortals poop souls? And the answer is, if you go by the standard definition of soul, which is it's an etheric reflection of something that's in the material realm, and it's generally associated with sentience, then the answer is no. But there are more than one definitions inside the Warhammer world where basically any life comes hand in hand with a soul, sometimes tiny. And if you go with that, then the answer is yes, because poo is full of life, of a variety of bacterial forms plus more. So the symbiotic relations, moving on from that, the symbiotic relations between bugs eating your fruit so they'll leave seeds and such, what happens to the souls then? It's a big, long, complicated mess. It would be the correct answer. In terms of that individual character's worldview inside that one, it is... that was an allegory and a mythical view of how the world could be understood and was simplified because of that. The reality would always be deeper, as your questions, I think, make very clear. Alrighty, so that was an easy one, I think. Moving down to Leon Grotsky. Hiya, and thanks very much for the super chat. Appreciated. There's a thank you. Oh, okay, great. I'm delighted. What are we thankful for? In about 5 hours, we'll be having session 2 of my Brunner the Bounty Hunter themed Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay campaign. And it wouldn't be happening without you and LAWhammer. Well, in turn, Leon, thank you for thanking me. And also, thank you for just playing one of what I think is the best settings that role-playing has to offer. For all it has its silly elements, its truly ridiculous elements, and parts of it are just... How can I not be uncharitable here? Let's just stick with stupid, eh? Parts of it are just stupid. Parts of it are also deep, meaningful, and an ripe opportunity for some really cool satire. And I am delighted to hear that you are gaining some joy out of it as well. I'm particularly delighted that you're getting some joy out of LAWhammer. LAWhammer for me has been, these last few months, a genuine source of release from the world as a whole, which not only has, on the macro scale, gone kind of mental. But on the micro scale, with just my personal family and the life surrounding me, it's just gone a little bit difficult. And it's been just a joy to have something I can escape into for a while, which is often far more grim and far more terrible than many people would prefer for their escapism, but I find particularly enjoyable. Alrighty, I'm going to dive back and see if I can find an at LAWhammer one and see what jumps out. There aren't many for this one, Captain Carl Pesh, who asks, economics of the Empire, any resources to recommend? So when we're dealing with the economics of the Empire, there's been a few articles here and there. For example, there's some trade zone articles that you'll find inside the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay Companion for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd Edition. That was done by Jude Holmberg, as I recall. Or alternatively, in the Old World Armory for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd Edition, there's some discussion about different coinage and the different way that the economics work there too. But in general, most of the economics of the Empire have been left either very broadly covered with big broad brushstrokes, and they're like, oh, there's 3 forms of coinage: your copper, brass, or alternatively cheap coin, your silver, and your gold coin. And depending upon the author, those coins will be described differently. Generally, they derive their worth from their actual metal content. And when writers remember that then makes them remember that the gold coins are the smallest by some significant measure, because gold is heavy and small amounts of gold is all that's required for it to retain its worth. So gold coins are the small ones, silver is slightly bigger, and the brass coins are the largest of them all. And those ones are often cut into bits. These bits in the Empire are often referred to as shrapnel, little bits and pieces that sit inside your pocket, little bits of coins. Now, of course, if you go to different parts of the Empire, they're all minting different versions of their coins, all of which have got different metal weights. So some of them, a silver piece, for example, that was minted in the spearmint and I admit it's called spearmint because of spears, and spearmint, it's a stupid joke, up in Middenheim, might have a completely different silver content to coins that are minted down in Altdorf. Each of the different mints across the Empire have got their own charters to produce coinage, often secured from local nobles all the way up to the elector counts, and they will have their own weights, and this massively complicates the Empire. So you tend to find most games ignore that, whilst individual stories or individual entries inside role-playing games dive into it. A very clear example of this is the Gilder over in Marienburg. The Gilder in Marienburg has got a gold weight that's heavier than the the Empire gold coin. Empire gold coin is worth approximately 20 silver coins, where if you take the Gilder, it's worth 22, or is it 21? I can't remember off the top of my head. It's one or the other. So cut a long story short, there is lots of different coinage, and that then applies to lots of different trading options across the Empire. Those 2 rule books I gave you reference to are a starting point, but a lot of it's going to have to be more of your own research if you're looking for how economics works in practice. Vespes comes in and says, hi, Andy. Hello, and thank you very much for the super chat. We will put this one towards building our studio, which I'm doing the plans for right now, and it sucks because it's actually surprisingly hard to draw. That aside, how do you set apart various magical items in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay mechanically, and with what justification? Runic items versus college items. What about first edition items that are activated via catchphrase? So Vespes, I'm not quite sure what you're asking. So I'm going to answer the question I think you're asking, which is loosely, what are the different categories of magic item and how are they reflected mechanically, I suppose, and what justification? Hopefully that'll come out through answering the question. I hope. Yeah, I reckon that'll work. So let's go with it. Runic items from the dwarves are super easy. If they were created by dwarves and they use dwarf runes, then it creates a dwarf runic item. It's got its own mechanics that the rune rules themselves will immediately provide you with. So that's one very simple category. When we move over to college items, these are badly defined by both Warhammer and Warhammer Fantasy Battle. Both games just go, yeah, these are things that have been sort of created at some point, away you go. And these include runic items to make matters even more complicated. Now, if we go back to Warhammer First Edition, there was literal runes, lesser runes of death, for example, greater runes and lesser runes that did various jobs. And these runes got picked up by the colleges of magic later and sort of became part of their thing. So there is clearly some sort of runic system the colleges make, but each one of the colleges have got their own different types of artifacts that they create. The far more martial Bright College, known for creating various weapons. If we go over to the Jade College, which is known for creating poultices and salves and potions and various effects that can not just bolster the land, but bolster people too. Each of the colleges have got their own thing. And at the moment, mechanically, they all work differently. And when you're creating them, there isn't a clear set of guidelines. Now, for my own game, there sort of is. I have got inside my version of the Colleges of Magic a career which is used for effectively all wizards who want to start making artifacts. And that career then taps into its own little, relatively poorly defined, but defined enough set of rules that allows wizards to make their own artifacts. It's something that, for example, in LAWhammer, it's relatively likely Elric might move on towards. If you know LAWhammer, Elric is a bright wizard inside our game, and he's very likely to move into those. But this is something that I've had to build myself because there is a gaping hole in the rules where they talk a lot about magic items that wizards have, and magic items that are heirlooms, and magic items that are divine, and magic items that are this, while simultaneously never really properly pinning them down very well as to both their creation and how to properly develop them. Because there's artifacts inside the Empire that have been passed down generation by generation, individual to individual, that never started off magical, that become magical. How do we mechanize that, make that an actual trait? And there are artifacts that have been blessed by certain gods and gained additional divinities over time, or blessed by priests or saints or something else. And again, they all follow slightly different mechanics. So going through this one, how do you set it apart? If I was to be relatively blunt, it's going to be narratively rather than mechanically, because most of the time it's the narrative, the story at hand, that defines the nature of that artifact, and then building mechanics that support that narrative is next. With what justification? Ultimately, Warhammer and Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay is a storytelling system. You are attempting to tell stories with the battles that you create, with the roleplay sessions you build, and what helps you build those battles and those stories for with your magical items is what justifies whatever particular rule you use. Runic items, college items, yeah, I know they're different. What about first edition items that have activated via catchphrase? Again, all of these things exist in Warhammer, all of those and more. And that's a really bad way of answering your question, because all I've basically said is there's no real consistency here except for arguably dwarven runes. Beyond that, every writer has taken their own route and every book has gone in its own direction, and nobody has ever properly sat down and really firmly codified it since the first edition of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. And it could almost certainly do with it. There was a plan during the early days of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4, when we were pinning down what the future of the books were going to be, and the initial Realms of Sorcery book, which was going to be, at the point it was getting originally pitched, it was going to be a 256-page book about all types of magic. And in there, dwarf rune magic would have been included inside the magic book rather than separated and turned into just a Colleges of Magic book. There was going to be approximately 25 pages on magical item creation beyond that, and it was going to have several different forms of magical item creation, and then a blanket, almost generic set of rules that supported it. One other thing that was definitely going to include at that point, it never came to pass, but it's worth knowing just if you're looking for different answers. One of the things it was going to include was also building flaws and building curses and building issues with magical items, because one of the things that Warhammer has as its core metaphors often is that power is dangerous, and that power comes with a cost. Now, in Warhammer Fantasy Battle, which is a big battle game, that's generally handled as a narrative only, in that it doesn't actually impact your battlefield. If you've got yourself, I don't know, an ogre blade with extra strength, you don't worry about, the fact that it makes you a big angry boy who's got massive social problems, because you got yourself a big ogre blade, and that's really good in the battlefield. The narratives of the characters take second place to what stats and benefits you gain on the battlefield. But for the fantasy roleplay game, it's a core component of understanding the magical artifacts. And sometimes the translation that some writers make from the fantasy battle version of artifacts into the Warhammer fantasy roleplay version of artifacts misses that completely. And I feel that that is not the best way to translate fantasy battle material. There's a lot I could say in this one, but loosely speaking, it's not particularly well codified, so it's up to yourself how you do it. I do it my own way for my games. Ugh, that was a long, protracted answer that didn't really pin much down. Apologies for that, Vespies. Anyway, Sig River Guide, hi. Subbed and left highlighted message on Twitch. Yay! I see it right over there, the highlighted message. It should be. Oh, it's not my next one. Interesting. Huh. Why hasn't it come over on this side? So I can see it over there. So I'm just going to bring up the fact that it didn't highlight on this side, but I've got it over there. So I'm just going to bring it up. Sig. In my novel, I have a human who mysteriously wakes up from the dead after drowning. Interesting. When they wake up, they are oozing, drenched in Ulgu. Oh, and from water. Interesting. How should I go about writing and approaching potent Ulgu witch who has 0 training and a year of experience under belt, but casting spells or magic happening? Right. So first, the nature of the immersion of Ulgu is interesting because normally when you are drowned, that's going to be dealing heavily with the lore of life and water, and those flows are deeply entrenched with Gyron. So if you're wanting to add Ulgu to this, I would be looking for mists and fogs and possibly for treachery to be occurring in or around this particular area. And possibly for the individual himself who is drowning, running away from some sort of treacherous event to really bring that Ulgu to the fore. As for how you go about dealing with potent Ulgu, Ulgu brings about with it a deep sense and a well of suspicion. People get uncertain, but it also brings wisdom. Ulgu is the wind of insightful intelligence, not necessarily logical intelligence or indeed illuminated intelligence. This is someone who's insightful and can see things into it. Many Ulgu practitioners make the best diplomats, and indeed many grey wizards become the diplomats of the empire. So considering the impact of politics and intrigue and mystery and uncertainty, wrapping all of that around the individual. Now, that doesn't mean the individual themselves is at the heart of it, although if there's a lot of Ulgu magic being spilled out from this individual, it's likely that those around them are going to start getting suspicious, strange, weird, and that should definitely be a thing, because with 0 training, it's very hard to keep the Ulgu within. The Ulgu's constantly seeping out, which means that this person might be a loner by themselves. Many people who use Ulgu are also known for wanting to wander. Going from one place to the next is both a practical reason, because wherever they stay, they are not trusted, but also the wind of Ulgu is constantly scudding from one place to the next as it rises up, often into storm clouds, and comes thudding back down into heavy mists and rains in a different place. So very possibly this person would be a wanderer by nature, a loner because no one trusts them, but someone who is naturally perhaps insightful, intelligent, and capable of seeing the problems that other people have, but often they won't trust the wisdom that's coming at them. They're almost getting Cassandra complex. If you don't know who Cassandra is, do a quick internet search of Cassandra, somebody who was cursed to see the truth but never be believed. And in some respects, many Ulgu witches will be like this, which means that many of them move themselves to the very periphery and edges, to the foggy reaches of the societies through which they will almost certainly be influencing. As for how those spells will work, largely Ulgu spells are Ulgu spells, and you'll be able to get a good insight into what they are both by reading Fantasy Battle and Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. It'll give you a nice broad array of different spells that you can draw from, and then think about how all of those would manifest as someone who's doing it instinctually. And by that I mean they're not as certain about results and they're more keen to playing on the edges. The colleges of magic have got fixed rotes for how they deal with their spells, and experimenting too far beyond those rotes is not considered to be a wise choice. This witch does not have those parameters in place. This witch is just feeling it out, trying it and giving it a go, meaning that they're going to be much more spongy in how their spells are cast. So think of each one of those spells and think that how the character of that wizard is going to make them manifest differently and how they could sometimes go wrong, because if they're not properly trained, they are going to get things going wrong all over the place, and that's also going to be something that they are going to be aware of and trying to mitigate for. So hopefully that's some loose guideline. I'm not entirely sure how useful that'll be for you though. Hey, Vespies, I've already covered that one. Let's move down to say yes. C is pronounced more like the J, so J, yes. An explosive D. Turkish is an interesting, it's a fuck you 40k, yeah. Have a big fun. So it's more of a J, yes. JS? Or is it just J's? J's. Is it just J's? J00. Also, fuck you 40k. Well, if you watched my episode of LAWhammer yesterday, there was a surprising bit of fuck you 40k, which actually makes me laugh. And not because we were saying fuck you 40k, but because of something that occurred in it that directly influenced 40k, I suppose. Not often you say that inside a Warhammer Fantasy stream. Yeah, that was fun. Dasix. Any tips for GMing a game in the Chase Wastelands? In the Chase Wastelands? In the Chase Wastelands. Chase Wastelands. In the Chase. I'm not sure what you mean by Chase. I'm diving down to the current one. So that being the case, if Dasix, if you're still in the chat, quickly clarify what you mean by Chase, because I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. Chaos! Thank you. Okay, Chaos Wastelands. I have thought it might be that. I should have just looked at my keyboard because I is beside O. In the Chaos Wastelands. So the Shadowlands up in the north and how to play there. Yeah, my first recommendation is go take a check at the... I think the best option would probably be the Tome of Corruption for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd Edition. The Tome of Corruption had a core goal of allowing you to portray chaos in all of its different forms. And that was both chaos in its most unacceptable, in its cult forms, and also in the actual realm of chaos and in Norska forms, both of which were kind of covered. They're all a bit loosely covered, but it makes for a fun starting point. My next suggestion would be go and check out any of the novels that are taking place up in the Chaos Wastelands, and there's a lot of them. I can't remember all of them off the top of my head. Indeed, just trying to remember them off the top of my head means that they've all immediately vanished from my mind. But there's novels dealing with Tzeentch cults up there, with Skulltaker and how he came about. That's a big demon, by the way. Azul. There's a lot of them. And they provide at least an idea. And they go all the way right back to the very first edition of the fantasy roleplay game and about the 3rd edition of Warhammer as well, where you get a host of characters who go up to the Chaos Wastelands in the north and things occur. Everyone from Gotrek and Felix to various characters. Johann von Mecklenburg goes up there to try and save his brother, one of the earlier stories from the writer of Drachenfels, Jack Yovel / Kim Newman. And later on, you find it becomes a bit more codified, a bit more like the army lists in its presentation, but nevertheless, there's lots of cool ideas. More generally, GMing up there will often come in one of two forms. Form number one is you are playing, in the loosest of sense, good guys moving into the Chaos Wastelands for one reason or another. And my overall general tip would be read up on the Chaos Wastelands, pick out the ideas you like, and go a bit random with it all. Give them all sorts of lurid landscapes and crazy characters to encounter. Not just good, not just bad, not just chaos. Everything can be found in the Chaos Wastelands. That makes for super fun. Alternatively, if you're on the other side and you're playing more of a path to glory style of campaign where they're chaos warriors, that can be quite problematic for many. So my recommendation for that one would be, rather than recommending a particular style or way of dealing with it, sit down with your players and find out what they want from the game. One of the most important sessions that many GMs forget about, particularly if they're playing with long established groups, is the session 0, where you're not just talking about what characters you're going to be playing and maybe creating your characters in session 0, but session 0 where you talk about what the game going to involve. Is everyone happy with it involving that? Does anyone have any red lines that they don't want crossed, or curtains that they'd rather have drawn for particularly terrible descriptions or particularly unfathomably awful encounters? And so often the response is surprising when you have a conversation with friends you thought you knew and you find out that some of them are uncomfortable with things you didn't expect, or are super comfortable with stuff that you just would never have expected them to be happy with. So including that, I think, would be a core component. We did this over on LAWhammer, and I put up a checklist of particular Warhammer Fantasy roleplay things. You'll find it over in the LAWhammer blog. I can't remember what I called it. I'll see if I can. If anyone in the chat has a link to that, that would be great. I will go and fish it out. It'd be really handy for Dasix to at least have that if he doesn't have it already. Right, moving down. Just a quick one on the way. Why, Gary, have I seen Night of the Seven Kingdoms? Of course, I've seen Night of the Seven Kingdoms. I mean, who would I be if I hadn't? Yeah, I watch almost everything. I'm a great consumer of media. I'm always looking to see what other people have done, both in terms of adaptions for books, and I think Night of the Seven Kingdoms work particularly well in comparison to some others, and also the original media they might have come from, reading the novels themselves. And yeah, I definitely have seen that. Mr. Speedfrog, hello, thought experiment. Okay, Mr. Speedfrog, let's go. What if LAWhammer Leopold was a priest to a different god? Ulrich, Shalia, Verena, Raya, Tal, Manan, Mort, or Ronald. So, for those of you who don't know, Leopold, not quite Leopold, it's Luipold, Luipold. Don't worry about it, it's Mr. Speedfrog. We all have funny spellings for different things. Leopold is a priest of Sigmar, and that has utterly defined both him and the entire story we've been telling in LAWhammer. And it was pre-chosen on purpose, because the story of the enemy within is the story, ultimately, of Sigmar. And this is often not understood, particularly when you take a look at some of the things that some of the writers have done with it. But the whole point of the campaign is ultimately about Sigmar's empire, about his hammer, and where Sigmar came from, and where the cult of Sigmar comes from. So having him as a cult, as a member of the cult of Sigmar, was a core component of ensuring that our version of the enemy within landed when we were presenting it for LAWhammer. However, you could easily have chosen any of the others, and I will quickly run through all of your suggestions here. Ulrich would have been perfect. One of the core schisms of the enemy within is the cult of Ulrich and the cult of Sigmar. The cult of Sigmar in the south, Ulrich in the north, and the religious schisms between the pair of them. And often that turns into conflict, deep conflict, both social conflict where they're arguing and physical conflict where eventually, come the end of the enemy within, turns to war. And having a character who spoke to one side of that conflict would have worked very well. Our campaign would have gone in a different direction, and one of our other characters, a character called Birdie, who is loosely sort of an Ulrican, she sort of fulfills that role. Shalia, having ourselves someone who is speaking for peace amongst our notoriously dodgy fellows, would have changed the tone of the adventure completely. If Leopold had kept much of his core components of his character, he would have probably been relatively self-righteous about it. He's relatively self-righteous about his Sigmarism, at least at the beginning. It erodes over time. But he's always been a very good public speaker, so he often gets people to turn around. It would have changed the tone of the entire campaign. Verena would have turned it into a far more law-focused route, and their travels through Talapine would have been completely different. Raya would have put far more focus, the same with Tal, over to the Talapine things. There is actually a triumvirate of religious schisms in 3 of the main cities of the Empire. That's Tal from Talapine, stroke Raya, kind of, Sigmar from Altdorf, and up with Middenheim, and of course, Ulrich. And they all have had warlike aspects of their past. And in our campaign in particular, Tal goes to war too, so that would have been fun. Manan is much more of a Marienburg focused deity, and also a sea-based deity, largely useless in a land-based campaign where you might go, well, he could drown people and stuff. Yeah, sure, but it wouldn't have fit the enemy within very well. I would have been against this from the beginning. It's not, I think, a priest that would have brought anything useful to the table in terms of the story that was being told in the enemy within. And ultimately, that's what we want. We want characters that can identify with, empathize with, and get involved with the core story of the campaign you're telling. And the Mananite would have been on the outside. More is always good. Everyone's dealing with death. There's not a lot of Morian stuff in the enemy within, but it kind of worked on Renald. We already have a priest of Renald inside our party, and it's Ume. And as she has most recently found out in episode 89, Renald isn't everything she thought it was, which is fun. Moving down, the Singemeister. What is the Warhammer Fantasy equivalent of your Das Hell's Evil? I don't know. I don't know what's making me laugh so much. But it really is. I'm instead, Singemeister, going to direct people to a different source. And this one I'm going to have to actually look up to make sure that I get it. I really need to organize the Patreon on our side a little bit better. I intended to, I'm on the wrong browser. Let me just open a different browser so I can pull out the Patreon link. I'm going to send you all over to the idioms dictionary that we have, because there's a host of ideas in there that you could use. If I write idioms, will I get it? What did I call it? Slang. Slang. Let's type slang into my search box. There it is, lexicon of slang. So let me just pop into there and get the link for you. Dive into there and see if you can find something that you think suits. All right, moving down. Gary Gideonson. Do you think, thank you very much, by the way, there could be different human species in the Warhammer world, similar to the Neanderthal, Denisovian lineages in the modern world, MK as ape man? The answer is yes, definitely yes. And the idea that there's humans that have both evolved separately from those that were uplifted by the old ones, those who have evolved just separately anyway, been mutated and changed by the influence of chaos, different humans doing different things in different parts of the old world. The answer is just, not just the old world, the Warhammer world as a whole. The answer is yes. There are almost certainly different types of human, and we already have multiple versions across the Warhammer world, some of which were created by magic, some of which were created by interbreeding, some of which were created just because the creators were racist and didn't understand they probably shouldn't create different races of humanity as possibly different species. The answer is broadly to this one, yes. There are a host of potential potholes for writers here where they end up, I don't know, fetishizing or really badly using racist tropes for different versions of humanity across the world. But broadly speaking, the answer is definitely yes. Sig River Guide. More help on how to explain in writing narratively instinctual Ulgu casting with zero training. By the way, Ulgu, because soul is partly missing at the Russeret. I'm not sure why having part of the soul being missing would naturally grant a space for Ulgu. And right, so there's a couple of things to say here, because I want to answer your question directly. First, saying that Ulgu is a core component of their existence, regardless of why it has occurred, is going to change their character in the ways I mentioned previously. But they are not trained, so they don't have all of the understanding of a grey wizard or someone who has been trained in the White Tower in Hoth. And they won't understand that Ulgu is its own thing. They won't understand that the other winds of magic, some of which they can vaguely probably perceive also, are also a separate thing to this particular witch. It's going to be magic. And I think that that is the first part of handling his narrative. To him, it's just magic. The Ulgu component is something that should probably be understood over time by the narrative of the story and them correlating, or the character correlating what they're doing with Ulgu. So perhaps other NPCs or other characters inside your tale can allow them to see that what they're doing is something different. The most obvious option would be something like a grey wizard or someone who's got understanding. But to them, it would just be magic. And to them, that magic would always be wispy. It would always be shadowy. It'd always be drifting around. It would sometimes be fighting and rising, twisting around people who are having arguments, who are having disagreements. And all of that magic is constantly like a pall of mist around this witch at almost all times. And it rises when things are uncertain, when people are lying, when politics are rising. And all of this is going to be something that is visible to this wizard. This wizard can see this shit, because that is what being able to see Ulgu allows. You can see when things get uncertain, when politics are rising, when deception is becoming a strong likelihood. So all of that is a bunch of situations, and the fog and the uncertainty of fog, the uncertainty of not being able to see something clearly. Whenever uncertainty is brought up, the magic is rising. And he's going to seek out those places because he's going to feel the magic rising there, because he's an instinctual caster. He's almost certainly not to just be using his sixth sense, his seventh sense, his ability to channel. And the easiest way to imagine channeling is it's your etheric hands, which goes out, grabs bits of the wind, pulls it to you, and mulches it together, while the words of magic then take what you've mulched together and forms it into a material effect. So he doesn't really understand he's got a sense that can reach out and do this. Instead, he'll just be concentrating. He might be using his hands, quite literally doing something physical to try and help his mind do the etheric component, which is dragging in all of this magic, which he's got to pull in. This is the channeling, and then pull and form into the correct type, which then the words of magic can turn into something real. And the words of magic, he's going to have all wrong. Where a Grey Wizard might just say Ulgu, for example. He might say Ulgu, getting it all wrong because it's instinctual. He's saying lots of weird sounds, which he knows will form this into something. And he's been experimenting with channeling the wind up, going to places where there's lots of this wind, and then trying different sounds and seeing how it responds. Sometimes it might turn into mist. Sometimes it makes someone run away because they're terrified by whatever he's done. Sometimes it might make him run away. He doesn't know. He hasn't been trained how to do magic. Every single sound that he makes when he pulls in this magic around him could potentially cause an effect. And he has learned over time, over the last year, which words are most likely to give him a clean effect. And every single time he does it, most other wizards who are in the area will probably sense it, because he is not a proper trained wizard, which means he won't just be using Ulgu unless you give a very strong reason for why he is. He will be using a mixture of the winds dominated by Ulgu, which means he's very likely, under some circumstances, to leave a trace of dar behind. That's black magic, when the winds are crunched together in a way that they don't naturally do, and the dar isn't used, gets discarded after the wizards use most of the grey in whatever spell's using. It falls by the wayside, and because it's in small traces, most witches can't see it. It takes a trained witch who's been shown how to see dar and perceive it, to see that cloying black tar-like substance that's not entirely unlike venom from the Spider-Man movies, dripping around and being an exceedingly telling tale that an untrained wizard has been by. Hopefully that gives you some extra guidelines. I'm not sure if it did. Again, Dunedin, hello. Hey, Andy. Hope all's well. I covered this earlier in the stream. All is kind of well, although I was in hospital. What colours would you say the Aenir wear when the Aenir wear when they go to war? Thinking about it from my tabletop army, I want some ideas. For me, the Aenir are winter stroke. I'm going to change that. They are seasonal, much like the Wood Elves are described in large parts inside their army lists. And different parts of the LAWlorn have got different tones attached to them. Now, the LAWlorn was expanded by, I believe it was Jude Hornburg, in a way that wasn't what I originally intended. So what I envisage for the LAWlorn isn't the same as what was written in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. In particular, my original version was led by two avatars of the gods, one of which was the Morai Heg, the avatar Morai Heg, and the other one was the avatar of Aneth Rayma. And the pair of them were the two queens that led that realm. And they had done so since that realm had founded a long time ago. And that entirely influenced everything about what the Aenir were going to be. Mara Seath, who is named inside Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition inside the core book, was going to be one of those characters. She was going to be the, did I say 89? Let's bring that one up. Yeah, I meant episode 79. I didn't mean episode 89. We're nowhere near episode 89. 79. Apologies for that. So I think we have to be relatively clear that I have a very different view of what the Aenir are. But my view of the Aenir is that they are seasonal, and different parts of the LAWlorn fall into different seasonal colors, which makes it relatively easy to paint them. They are, all of them, though, not idiots, meaning that they camouflage themselves, which means leaning into browns and greens is always a good idea. As you move north in the LAWlorn, there's a lot of pine up there, so you're dealing with a bluer green, and you're dealing with a slightly darker trunk color than you might find in the south. As you move down towards the south, it moves more into deciduous of various types, and you can pull upon almost any tree type for your camouflage side. And that's broadly where I start for mine. They're a mixture of seasonal and tree-based color schemes. And I know that's really simple, but it's kind of what mine are. And I hope that that answers your question. Biofoot, how long until spiders evolve bones and get big? A long, long time. One of the books I used to love as a kid was called After Man. And I might go get a link for it because it is actually genuinely quite fun. And it shows how evolution could occur. It's an old book. It was made in back in the 80s or something like that. I've just found it. Here we go. Let me just give the Wikipedia link for that. And it showed how different creatures across the real world could evolve into what we would see as fantasy species. And it was great. I loved it. It was, for me, one of the better world building experiences that I was in pretty much given when I was a kid. I adored this book. Most of the pictures in there I redrew myself, and I then used to be a source of how I imagined other creatures would move. And I recommend What the Bats Become in that one. Go take a check at that one, Biofoot. I think you'd like it. Gary Gillianson, if a high concept novel series were ever to be made about the era of the old ones, Fantasy 40k, which non-Black Library author would you entrust with it? That's tough because one of the ones that I would have preferred to do has just moved into Black Library. A high concept novel about the era of the old ones. Fantasy and 40k are really different because the era of the old ones with 40k is so long ago. And you're dealing with the great war in heaven and the Necrons and the creation of the various species and the Elder et al. That would be a very different ask to, for example, pre-Cataclysm leading into the Cataclysm story for fantasy, which I'm going to stick with because that's much more LAWhammer adjacent, which is the channel I'm currently on. So let's go with the fantasy version. So we're dealing with a high-tech stroke fantasy stroke divine story. So I know who I'd like to do it, and he's just died. I think that an unexpectedly awesome version of that could be written by Dan Simmons. And if you don't know Dan Simmons' work, I recommend you go check it out. He very recently died, sadly missed. Some of his books are really quite extraordinary. Hyperion, I really enjoyed. Really enjoyed. Ilium, pretty good too. And Ilium in particular is where I'm beginning to draw some of this could percolate into something great. He would bring a high concept to it that I think most would not expect. And yeah, I got my episode wrong. I'll just bring it up one more time. 9 episodes to episode 88. Yes, I know. Apologies for that one. Skara, Prince of the Parade. Thank you very much. Deeply appreciated. Your thoughts? A Skaven character that is emulating the appearance of Vermin King, with their mind connected with the largest rat hound. Also, how big would the hound be if you could help with that? Okay, the largest rat hound. So rat wolves and rat hounds have been kicking around in Skaven lore since 4th edition. And in fact, maybe even a mention in 3rd. I need to go check that just to double check. And in their original conception, they were just slightly larger than wolves, moving up to the size of the giant wolves that you would find goblins riding. And they were pretty big. Pretty big. The giant wolves in Warhammer are approximately the size of the wargs that you find inside the Lord of the Rings movies. If you want to see a version of them moving, but you've seen the miniatures, you know how big they are. They're about the size of a horse. They're pretty dang huge. But if we're going for the largest one, we're now moving towards the idea of what is Clan Moulder capable of doing. And if you really want to go for the largest, it's going to be a lot bigger. Bigger than a horse by some significant measure. And it's probably going to be carrying a host of gentle mutations. It's going to have bulbous, green, horrible, pestilent sores on it. It's likely to have some sort of mechanical device with a large jar that's pumping it full of some sort of refined warpstone as well to keep it going. Think of some of the Rat Ogre miniatures and where they moved as we move into 8th edition. All of that is a potential, particularly if it's looking to be something that can somehow survive at that size and still be potent and not collapse under its own weight. That being the case, I would probably look at approximately Griffin size. It seems fair. you might disagree and go for something completely different. Chapter Grim. Why no green thistles in Bogenhafen in Empire and Shadows? You know what? I can't remember. Honestly, can't remember. Hey, Chapter Grim. What's green thistles? Drop it in. Is it a location that was missed? And if so, that's a good question. I'm going to have to go check it out. I'm trying to remember, and I don't remember it. Oh, this is really annoying. Yeah, nothing's coming up online for immediate search, which means I'd have to go and read it, which I can't do right here. So if you could drop it in. Where is the halfling cam mentioned from? So where is the green thistle sourced, Chapter Grim, if you can tell me, and I will bring it up, because I can't remember. It's been so, it was 7, 8 years ago that I last was doing that. Was it 7, 8 years ago? Where are we? 2006? No, it wasn't. It was 6, 7. No, it was 8 years ago that I was writing this. 7 years ago that we were heading it towards production, and 6 years ago that I then resigned. So it was some time ago. So can you tell me where the green thistles are particularly sourced from? And then I will give you the answer, because I should be able to get it from then. So while you're doing that, Chapter Grim, I'll take the next question, then go down and check the comments again to see if that's been answered. Monkey King, his species as pre-Old One hominids. Very possibly, yes, I think Knievel. In terms of what the Monkey King might be, he could be anything from god to pre-Old One hominid to something that's been elevated. He could be any of those things, different species entirely, possibly of human. And most likely, I think, knowing Games Workshop and his desire to replicate everything in the world, he will probably be a god. Moving back down, Sigmar's Heirs. So Sigmar's Heirs in the back in the adventure, with the Bogenhafen adventure back there. Okay. I can tell you the real reason. The real reason is when Graham was putting together the update to Shadows over Bogenhafen, he did not include anything other than what was in Shadows over Bogenhafen. When we then expanded it and I wrote a new treatment, it included many more sources, but I didn't include Sigmar's Heirs in that. I then passed it over to Andy Leask to do his treatment and do a lore check on. By this point, all of the locations were in place, and where the halfling families were going to go was already in place and didn't include the green thistles. So I'm going to presume at that point, Andy didn't add it. So then it came back to me, and this is when I do my editing pass rather than my writing pass. And my editing pass isn't necessarily doing all editing duties. I had an editor to do that. It's to do all of my lore edits, which I would then have gone through the entire book to make sure that everything that needs to be referenced should be referenced. I then resigned. So I resigned before this book went through that pass with me, which means that there is a bit of the process that I would have done that never occurred. And I didn't reference Sigmar's Heirs when I was building the first version of Bogenhafen, but I probably would have checked it all when I did my last editing pass. I mean, I'm almost certain I would have, because whenever I do my last editing passes, one of the parts of that is, okay, what are all the sources for this? Let's go double check them to make sure there's nothing that I want to at least mention. And I would have almost certainly gone to the adventure at the back of Sigmar's Heirs, because it was there, and the details that were provided for Bogenhafen in that book. So yeah, blame me, I think, is the best option out of all of this, I think, because I didn't catch this in my past when I was doing my writing. Andy Leask wouldn't be expected to do this. He was basically taking everything that I said needs to be embellished and written further and going further with it. And I was no longer in the place to do it afterwards. You could try and claim that the person who came in and did the edit afterwards is at fault, but for goodness sake, I gave them pretty much a finished book for Enemy in Shadows. Not entirely finished. There's a few sections that I wanted to tweak before the book was published, but I resigned before that. They then did the layout for the book in whichever fashion they want. I'd done half the layout, and they then did a new layout. So I would suggest that the answer to this one is because I didn't add it and hadn't done my final pass to make sure everything was included. So blame me for that one. All right, so moving back down to our, we are at David. What time are we at? We're at almost 22. So I have two things to say. First, after this stream, Rookery Publications is having a chat with Jendia Gammon, who is an author that you may or may not know. It doesn't really matter if you do or don't know her, because what they're discussing is freaking awesome. They're discussing adding eldritch horror to your fantasies, and that includes adding eldritch horror to Warhammer. And Warhammer was always at its root about adding kind of Call of Cthulhu to a fantasy setting. That's what the Shadows over Bergenhafen adventure is. It's Call of Cthulhu in Warhammer. And we're going to be discussing how to add that. But also, Jendy is going to be giving our free giveaway in the next episode. So if you hike over to Rookery Publications after this stream, at some point through the course of that hour, you'll get a free giveaway where you'll be able to tap in something, I presume, and get something for free. Sounds great. So make sure you do drop along to that. Anyway, let's carry on. David Casagrande, I am almost certainly pronouncing your name wrong, apologies if I am. I think it is possible to have a trickster-type Grail Knight who drinks from the Grail through trickery, but is accepted because who the lady truly is. So the lady is not a goddess of trickery. I think that needs to be very clearly understood. The lady is either, depending on which version you go with, Lilith, who would not appreciate trickery at all. Ladriel, who is a goddess of shadows and mist, and not trickery. That's more Loic's sphere. She's much more a goddess of hiding, would be better. And depending upon the route towards trickery, for example, someone on the run, someone attempting to get away from some horror, there's definitely something here that you could go. But if it's pure trickery, I would suggest that's probably not the lady's expected result to it. Plus, the lady, as she's portrayed in Bretonnian mythology, is much more honorable and noble and down on things like trickery, meaning that it would undermine the core concepts of what the lady is to the Bretonnians. So the chance of her allowing a trickster to get away with it without consequences are pretty low, because it would undermine the entire Bretonnian religious structures that she had been instrumental in building. I would suggest you could do this, and I see no reason why this couldn't be done, but it should probably be more complicated than simply it's accepted. It should come with an unexpected burden, because it's hard to trick a tricker. And I know I just said she's not really a trickster, but she is someone who's very used to deception. And it is very hard to trick a tricker. So it's much more likely that it comes with unexpected consequences, which is a common Warhammer theme. So I would probably go with that. It's not so much that it's been accepted, it's that now you are in a position where the consequences of your actions have very real outcomes, and you're going to have to now deal with those. Away you go and figure out how you're going to do that, because trickery or whatever else is no longer going to see you through wholly. But perhaps, again, because she is a goddess of mists and shadows, there is a certain route through that potential story that could make for a fascinating character. So I think the character type is almost perfect, but I would be very careful with the trickery aspect of it. Biofoot, could a swarm of bees each hold teeth thinking jaws? I'm not even sure how to parse that sentence. Biofoot. So first, thank you very much for supporting the channel. That's another pound that's going to go towards helping me build my studio over there. Could a swarm of bees, okay, so I've got my swarm, I'm imagining, buzz, 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 each hold, so are we talking about each bee now within the swarm? Because you've used each. So it's not swarms and each, so it's not multiple swarms, it's one swarm of bees, each bee of which is holding teeth to presumably make a giant set of jaws with bees holding teeth. I mean, could it? Almost certainly no, because teeth are heavier than bees. Unless they're really tiny, tiny teeth from a tiny creature, and they'd make a really, really tiny set of jaws. But you'd also need some method of controlling those bees into making your giant jaw-like creature. And why don't they just sting you? That seems much easier. Hannah. Hi, Andy. Hiya, Hannah. Lovely to speak to you. Have you ever used Malekith or Marathi in a Warhammer Fantasy roleplay game? Oh, yeah. Been wondering since Alamenowith meeting him was mentioned. So, Malekith, or Malarian, if you prefer, has been used extensively in one of my campaigns, almost 4 years worth of character interactions with that character. Marathi was a lover of one of my characters for a very long time as well. So the answer is bluntly Yes, extensive use. I even drew Marathi 4 or 5 times for the particular campaign we're in. Malekith was a secondary character in that campaign. We even played a game called the Game of Houses, which was one of the PCs was leading one of the Dark Elf houses, seeking to gain the attention or not the attention of the Witch King. And that had its own set of mini-game rules. We played it on a hex map, and each hex could have different constructions, and those constructions help build the house into a stronger thing. Everything from your, pens for your cold ones, and particular types of crops being grown, ironwood, so that they could build better ships, so they could do slave raids over into the old world, and the old world slave raids, and also slave raids into other parts of the world were a core component of building that game. It was a super fun mini game. Loads of love towards that. Had a lot of fun with it. And Alemanawith has indeed met not just one, but both. And that is something that will pop up in stream 14.3, which has never been put online because our original recording of it was lost. So they are characters who will be popping up inside LAWhammer, and you'll get to see some of the background of Alemanawith through that. But I'm sort of glad that it was lost, because some of it included such spoilers to the stuff that's happening just now that it's actually quite fun that you don't get to know it until after. So Lindsay and I are going to be re-recording this episode, which we attempted to re-record now 3 times, and each time a technical issue came up. The episode is genuinely cursed. And we, in an attempt to make sure we record it all, split it up into its various sessions. It's likely to be, when we eventually do this rejig of the episode, about 5 to 6 hours long. Oh, it's a big one. So the answer to that one is yes. Let me just check where we are in my super chat stream. When I decide how fast I need to go. Oh, no, we're doing okay. What time are we at? Quarter of an hour. Yeah, I'm doing okay. Ricardo Andre, what place do you think Erith Cael fits in the pantheon and the representation of facets of elven psyche? Unshackled ambition, usurpation. I've half discussed this before in previous streams, and Ricardo, I'm apologizing in advance to say I'm about to handle it in exactly the same way I did before. And by that, it is to say I'm doing an actual expansion for my game that answers all of this, and I don't want to constrain myself to definitely not contradicting myself at a later date in this. And by that I mean my Erith Cael part is finished, but I want to finish the other gods in case I go back to Erith Cael and make small amendments which would make the answer to this a little bit different. It's important that the entire pantheon works, particularly for elves who are, with the relationship with their gods, somewhat more clean in their definitions than, say, for example, the messy thousands of gods you'll find in the Empire, and presumably the equivalent you'll find in Ind or elsewhere. The elven gods, particularly with the way I'm pitching them, have a far cleaner representation. So I'd like to hold off on that answer, be very apologetic and say, watch this space. I do have something coming up. The next part over on my Patreon is going to be the Path of the Mariner. That's finished completely. I just haven't posted it because I didn't like the art, and because I made a bit of art for it, didn't like the art, and just as I was about to redo it, my dad got very ill, and I haven't gone back to it since my dad died last month. So was it last month? Was it 2 months ago now? Christ, time's passing fast. So I just haven't got back to it yet, but I have that one written. I've got Erith Cael pretty much finished. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 others almost done too. So there's going to be quite a lot of that coming over on my Patreon. So I wouldn't like to ruin it for all those folks yet. Skara, Prince of the Parade. Also, can you give me a color scheme for my Ned? Do you mean your Neds, as in your Tyranids? Is that what you mean? I'm looking down, Skara, for the current comments. So if you are still in the comments, go tell me if you mean Tyranids. Because if so, yeah, sure, I'll happily give you a color scheme for Tyranids. Yeah. While you're answering that one. Damn it, Andy, you said the previous stream to come early to another A and make the question again because I asked late in the last one. Damn it, I'm just laughing. Yeah, it's fair. My opinion has moved slightly on from them, but there should be an answer relatively soon on this one because I've got the majority of it written out. And I am going to be sharing it quite soon too. And on Skara's point is indeed for Tyranids with the Nid army. I thought it was Nids, but I just wanted to make sure. I don't want to sit here and wax lyrical. Tyranids I tend to prefer Tyranids that look, now this is going to sound stupid, but look real. And by that I mean real-world creatures rarely follow my carapace is one color, my underbelly is another. Where often the Tyranids are given like a two-tone scheme because it makes it super easy. But the best Tyranids I've ever seen have either been one of two things. One, where they've gone for a universal color scheme, which just makes the whole thing look beautiful. So, for example, they've all got very dark blue flesh. They've perhaps got bone carapace pieces all over, and they've got like green mucus bits sitting between it all. It makes for a nice contrast between the dark, the mid-color green, the highlight of the bone. Or alternatively, those that have got, again, if you look at real-world versions of lizards, real-world birds, they've got this different qualities of color and tone throughout, and having each one of the units have their own one rather than having a universal army all having the same color scheme because they come from the same hive fleet. And it allows for clean unit differentiation on the table. It makes it look less of a cohesive unit unless you make all, say, the carapaces somewhat similarly toned. And the best army I ever saw was one that did all the carapaces the same color. It was a bone color, but I say bone, it was this lovely mixture of bone going into sort of deep turquoises on the inside. And the actual army, every unit was individual, but each unit all had its own cohesive scheme. And the Tyranid warriors, or whichever ones that they had, were there. But if you want a clean scheme, go dark, a mid-color like green, a highlight color like bone. If you want to go all realistic, you might get one of the bestest looking armies ever, but it's a pain in the arse to paint. Sig River Guide, how would you better justify Ulgu? Loosely now, is dooming claimed by more? Tzeentch involved with Changeling playing a trick and resurrected? Thoughts? Okay, so the dooming is more. It's a blessing of more if it's done correctly. It has nothing at all to do with Ulgu. If you wish to tie it to an individual wind, it would be Shyish, the wind of death. It would also be the wind of Azir, because Azir sees into the future, and dooming is all about something that is coming to pass at a later date. So if you're looking to tie dooming in somehow, that would be blue and purple winds being used for different reasons. Ulgu does not have foretelling capacity. Ulgu is all about deception. Now, could you instead then deceive someone into thinking that their dooming is something else? Now we're dealing with Ulgu. So is Tzeentch involved? Traditionally, no. If you wish to do it for your version, of course, but the answer is no. And is the Changeling playing a trick and resurrection and the ideas of that? The Changeling's constantly doing crazy stuff, so you can include it in any way you want. But the answer for the overall, as in, is the whole thing just the Changeling? The answer is no. But you could, of course, make that an individual story. Agar, 89, checking time. We're at 8 minutes 2, checking comments. Oh, sort of half speed up with the last few. Do you think it would be possible to have a Dwarf Rune Lord and High Elf Archmage team up against an enemy wizard? Yes. In the essence of Starkey and Hutch Rush Hour. Hilarious. Yes. Would this make a weird buddy comedy? Yeah, sure, because there would be the inevitable, we don't get on to begin with, and that through their shared experience would turn into a begrudging respect, and then it would turn into a pairing that they would have their rivalries and their differences, but would kind of get on. Yeah, I think that would work really, really well. On that, I'm aware that we're almost arriving at time, so I'm going to make sure that I head over towards this side. General Caster is next. Bloke person and I have been trying to work out why Bilthofen loses his electoral count status post-turmoil. Could him trying to stage a coup against Toddy, like Gausser, but failing be the reason for that? Absolutely could, but it's far more likely Toddy is the one staging a coup against him and wins. Far more likely, because as far as Middenheim is concerned, it should be the capital and wants Middenland. Middenland doesn't really want Middenheim. It's beyond its reach. It's far, far to the north. And Middenheim is an absolute pain in the ass to capture. Admittedly, Karabberg isn't that much better. And Karabberg has been in the hands of Reichland at more than one point in its past. But it seems far more likely that it would be Boris Todbringer being the aggressor than the other way around. Moving down from that one, Ricky Chapman, member for 6 months. Thank you very much. Andy, good to see you. Been busy with college and currently doing something. Good to see you busy with college. Good to see you. You've been busy with college. Pardon me, misunderstood your question there. I'm currently doing something we enjoy, making backstories for all our LAWhammer figures, even the skeletons. I strongly agree, Ricky. I think that's one of the fun things of collecting any army, is justifying all the cool miniatures that you've chosen. And moving into a super chat, thank you very much, appreciated. That's going towards building our studio. Also, making a giant and enjoying the concept of a giant who walked through some silken webs, and while the webs didn't break the trees, they were attached to. Did the idea? It's hilarious to us. What, like all the webs hanging off it? Is that what you're going for? Silken webs didn't break the trees they were attached to. I'm not quite sure why it's hilarious. I feel like I'm missing something here. If you can tell me why it's hilarious, I'm just getting this idea of this giant wading through the trees, the poor spider riders going, what the fuck are you doing? As they just go through the other side. Nothing gets stuck and they ruin the spider's day. If that's it, then great. Holy cremolians, Kuroshima. This is a big comment. I can't even see myself anymore. We're almost on the hour. We've got 6 minutes left. It may take all 6 minutes to get through this one. This would sound like a bait question. So I've been hesitant to ask, but do you think trying to not offend people may be restricting creative writing? I'm asking because as Asian who grew up in Asia before moving to the West, I've always loved the idea of a fantasy world where races and cultures are randomized. For example, Caucasians have an Oriental culture, Japanese African culture, but many may find it to be cultural appropriation. Your thoughts? I heavily agree and heavily disagree all at once. Is it stifling creativity? Hell yes, it is. And in some places, it's stifling creativity in a negative way. But in others, it causes creativity because people are attempting to build better answers for solutions that in the past did have terrible cultural appropriation. Now, I won't dive too much into that, but loosely, when you've got people on the outside of a culture that's oppressed, making money from that culture, and none of that money goes to that culture, it's basically just abusing them a second time. And I can understand why that would make people in that culture deeply upset. I would be upset if I found my culture was being absolutely rewritten by an outside culture and their rewrites just made it look stupid. This happens all the time with Scotland. And does it upset me? Yes, often. Take a look at the more obvious ones to go with, say, for example, Seven Deadly Sins, the manga stroke anime. That's set in the UK and Scotland, and it's stupid. Nothing like Scotland. But that one I kind of let off because it's so disparate from its origins that you kind of don't even notice it. But the amount of American versions of Scotland that I see that just make me go, what the hell are you doing? That is just not Scotland. Makes me a little bit upset sometimes. And I'm not an oppressed group, and I still get upset about it. If I was oppressed, and for the last 5 centuries of my people's existence, we had oppression from the group doing the oppressor, and now they're making money off it by, again, mischaracterizing it, I would genuinely get annoyed. So does it cause upset? Yes. Does it cause creativity to be stifled? Sometimes, yes, because people don't want to accidentally get into trouble for cultural appropriation or upset other people for cultural appropriation. But does that mean it can't be done? And the answer is a heavy no. There's lots of good examples where other people's cultures have been portrayed very well, and sometimes far better than people suspect. And I will give a simple one, Sucker Punch, on what they did with their games for PS, I think it was 4 and 5, or was it just PS5, that are set over in Japan. And I remember the reviews at the time for the Ghosts of Tsushima game and then the later Ghost game, where the Japanese press were saying this, why didn't we make this game? So if it's done well, and you get yourself a lot of support from people who understand those cultures, it doesn't suppress creativity. In fact, it makes you work harder to make sure you get it right. So I think it can be done very well. You just have to make sure you do it. Apparently, I've missed 2 super chats. Holy crap, and I've only got 3 minutes left. Okay, Skara, what ones did I miss? I'm moving down very quickly as I catch the last few here. Moving down, you didn't think I'd be aware of 7 Deadly Sins. I watch everything, Ricardo. So I'll just quickly get this one. Thoughts on Russia, Kislev being too Russian focused. I think it's too Russian focused. That's my thoughts. So what did I miss, Skara? Tell me about the Tyranid question, by the way. So before the Tyranid question, right? I'm moving back up to see if I can catch it. Okay, so Skara, let me just catch them. Oh, here we are. Apparently I did miss 2. There we go. There we go. So what is the lore of the Horned Rat? Is it a wind? It is not. It is, if you wish, a mixture of the winds and Dar, which works perfectly, or alternatively, the divine blessings of a god, both of which work relatively well. But they are spells and can be dispelled, so the divine blessings, as we understand them, don't quite match. It is probably just one of the chaos lores made manifest, as in it's one of the dark lores of magic mixed with everything else too. It's classic Skaven. They just mulch everything together and throw throw it out. It is not a single wind, nor is it a single use of one of the winds. It's all the winds mulched together, including bits of Dar. And that's probably the correct answer. Apologies for missing those two earlier. Whoa! All right, so I should go check to see if they've started streaming on the Rookery side, because that would be a good idea before I send people to go over there. Before I do that, I have a couple of things to say. Let me check if they're started. They have not started. There's currently 11 people waiting on their side. So I've got a couple of things to say. Number one, thank you very much for coming along. And for those of you who sent super chats my way, thank you so much. That's all going towards our new studio that we're in the process of spending somewhere in the region of about 60 grand on, and it's making me very, very sad. And that's not even putting all the things inside it that we need inside it. Number two, we're about to move over towards building Eldritch Realms with Jendia Gammon over in Rookie Publications. Please do go watch this one, because this one is so Warhammer skewed, even if it's not necessarily speaking directly to Warhammer, that I think a lot of you will get a lot out of this one. It's all about how to bring Eldritch horror into your standard fantasy, and that's what Warhammer does. The original Shadows over Bergenhafen was basically, how do you make a Cthulhu adventure for a fantasy setting? And Shadows over Bergenhafen was the first attempt to bring that Eldritch horror in. And Jendia is going to be speaking about how to do this to all of your fantasy games. I think it's going to be super awesome. On the flip side, I've got another one. Missed my chat earlier on. Wait a minute, let me just see this one. Missed my cheer earlier on. So I'm just catching this one. Oldon Army calls Elven Gold coin sovereigns. Yeah, obviously a nod to British sovereign coin, yes, but omits silver and brass names. What would be a good name for them, as not to call them Elven shillings? Probably they're going to go down the routes like dragons and eagles and similar creatures, and I'm not even sure sovereigns is necessarily the best name for them. That sounds like an outsider name for it on the inside. Go with creature names and you're almost certainly sound there. Let me just check if they're starting. They are starting over there, so I'm about to finish this stream now because it's good. There's also going to be a giveaway inside the stream from Jendia. So if you'd like to get yourself a freebie, do check the next stream, because that's going. So I'm going to send over the Twitch folks right now. Away you go, Twitchy people, as hopefully I have just done a raid. I don't know if that's worked. If that's worked, it's worked. I always find it rather amusing when raids go on Twitch, because sometimes they go for me and sometimes they don't. Hopefully it has. Other than that, if you're on YouTube and watching me right now as the raiders disappear over in Twitch, YouTube should hopefully give you a quick window once I close this stream off that says, click through and watch. Please do click through and watch, because it's going to be a super fun stream. I do believe that they are starting this very second, so I'm going to pass you over to them. Until then, goodbye.